Hi, and welcome to the Golaem Quickstart tutorial. In this video, we will show you how to create and render a simple crowd scene with Golaem. If you do not have the Golaem packages yet, you can go to our website and fill the evolution form. You will receive the download links just after submitting it. The installation is pretty straightforward, but if you need help, you can go to the support section of our website and check the installation guide. So let's start Maya. When Golaem is installed, it automatically appears in the plugin manager. To load the plugin, go into the Maya plugin manager, look for the Golaem Crowd package, and load it. You can also check the auto load button if you want to. When the plugin is loaded, it creates a Golaem shelf as well as two menus, a Golaem menu and a Golaem render menu. Let's start by checking if your Maya settings are correctly set. As Golaem relies on Maya particles, Maya's playback speed needs to be set to play every frame. You also want to make sure that the linear working units of Maya are set to centimeters, as well as locators, plugin shapes, and polygons are shown into the viewports. The next step is to create a first character. Characters are defined by their entity types, and you can create an entity type with this button here. It will create a new node, and in the attribute editor you can check the attribute of that node. It contains a character file which defines the skeleton and the geometry of your character. It's also linked to a behavior which tells your character what to do. Here I'm going to load the Crowdman character from the Golaem assets. You should have downloaded the Golaem assets pack at the same time you downloaded the Golaem package. Once installed, you can go into the package main directory, Golaem characters, and you will find a bunch of ready-to-use crowd characters. Here I'm going to use the Crowdman Lite version. Next, I want to create a terrain node. I'm going to use the terrain locator. By default, it creates a default plane, and that terrain will be used to make sure that our character feet are adapted to the ground. Next step is to place characters. For this, use the population tool. As it's a Maya tool, make sure to double click on it to get the tool settings. Amongst the different settings, you can select the shape you want to use. Here I'm going to stick with the grid shape. I'm going to click in the viewport to create a new population tool locator, and in the attribute of that locator you can change the number of particles you want to have. As it's a grid shape, you can change the size of the grid, the distance between the characters, noise the position, change the orientation, and noise the orientation. When you're happy, press create to create a new particle system, as Golaem uses particles. It's also created a crowd field node which will place characters on top of the particles. Check the scene settings once again. Everything is okay. Now we're ready to look how our simulation looks like. Rewind the simulation, play a couple of frames. What you can see in the viewport is the skeleton of your characters. Notice that they're not doing anything yet. It's because we haven't defined any behaviors. If you click on a character, you should get its visual feedback. Here you get useful information about that entity. So its entity ID, its particle ID, or its velocities. In this panel you can visualize the running behaviors, but we'll come back here later. Here you can activate and deactivate several debug helpers. Let's now change the display of our characters. Go back into the entity type node and check for the display mode attribute. Right now we're displaying our characters as animation bones. but we can use the render previs mode. The render previs mode allows to previs what the characters would look like at render time. Right now, our characters are all orange, which is the default Golem shader. To import the character shaders, which will be used by both the display and the render, go into the Golem render menu and check the import shaders option. So it's notifying that no shaders are currently missing, but I want to override this and load the shaders. The shaders are also into the Golem assets pack directory. Go into the main directory, Golem and shaders, and you'll find a list of the different shaders for the different characters and the different rendering engine. Make sure to pick the right one. Here I'm using the man light file, and I want to use manta ray as a rendering engine, so I'm going to use that shader file. When the shaders are loaded, a new character appears in the scene. It's actually a Maya characters, which holds all the shaders, which is going to be used by the characters. Make sure not to hide that character, else the shaders won't be used at rendering time, and you can either move it away from the camera or leave it here. The primary visibility of the different meshes has been disabled, so it will not appear at rendering time. Let's update the geometry of the render previs to get the shaders displayed. So go into the entity type, render previs display attribute, and ask to refresh the geometry. Check the viewport to get the shaders updated. And here we go. As you can see, all the characters don't have the same assets. There are some characters with trousers and some characters with short pants. There are some characters with t-shirts and some characters with sweatshirts. So let's change the geometry repartition. So you can either use the character maker from here, or go into your entity type and open the character maker from there with the file already loaded into it. The character maker holds the information about the character skeleton and the character geometry. So let's take a look at the different pieces of geometry of my characters. My characters has hair, but there's just one hair mesh. It has undercoat, and amongst the undercoat it can be either a t-shirt or a sweatshirt. It has pants, which is going to be either a long pants, trousers, or a short pants. Here is the rendering type that we assign to a character, and it's like a recipe telling you how to build a character. You can use the sliders here to specify that you want more or less of each asset. So let's get more t-shirts and more trousers. Do not forget to save the character file after modifying it. And let's rewind the sim and play a couple of frames. And now you have more characters with t-shirts and more characters with trousers. What about rendering that scene? First I need to select the rendering engine I want to use. Here I'm going to use manta ray. Then I want to create a crowd render proxy, which is going to be used to handle the rendering of a crowd. So we can use the render proxy icon here. It's asking me if I want to create a render proxy, so sure. And then it's running a checker to check that everything is correct. Right now, we forgot to export our simulation, so it's specifying that simulation has not been exported. So let's export the simulation. To export a simulation, I can use the simulation exporter tool, in which I can specify the name of the cache, where the cache is going to be exported, and what's the start frame and the end frame. So let's export the simulation between frame 1 and 50. This creates a small simulation cache for each frame, which contains the position of the character and their joint orientation, so we don't have to export the full geometry of every character. The geometry will be actually rebuilt for every character at render time when the renderer will need it. So let's check the rendering. So when the rendering starts, it places bounding box in the scene where the characters are, and when the renderer hits one of those bounding box, the Golem mentor plugin generates the geometry for those guys with the correct geometry and the correct shaders. Speaking about shaders, you may notice that there is a difference between the shader applied in the viewport and the shader applied in the rendering. This is because on the character assets, we define some shading variations, some texture variations, and some variation in terms of hue, saturation, and lightness. Now, open the behavior editor to assign behaviors to our characters and animate them. Here, I can find my entity type. If I double click on it, I get its container. On the left is the starting point of the simulation. On the right is the final point, and we'll drag and drop behaviors in the middle. Let's drag and drop a motion behavior here and double click on it to load the motion file. Into the Golem assets pack, in Golem motions, there are a bunch of different animations. If you go to audience, you get the stadium animation, loop, and let's pick the sit watching animation. Let's rewind the simulation and play a couple of frames. As you may notice, they're all playing the same animation at the same frame. As the motion is a loop, we could actually randomize the starting point of where it starts by using the start percent attribute. So into the motion behavior, let's change the start percent max to 1, which means that they could use any start frame for any characters where they want to. Okay, better. Click on the character to display its visual feedback again. So you can check the footprint computing for your motion as well as the poster. You can see that a motion behavior is running. You can hide or show the clip which is played. You can even select the motion behavior if you want to edit its properties. When the visual feedback is active, the active behaviors are also highlighted in green into the behavior graph so that you can know where your characters stand into the behavior graph, and it can be helpful to debug a simulation and know which behaviors is blocking the flow. So let's re-export the simulation including this animation and render again. Okay, so what if you want to be able to scrub into the timeline or replay your simulation but not reconfigure it, or simply edit your simulation cache? For all those matters, you can use the simulation cache proxy. So here we're going to create a simulation cache proxy node, and as soon as the node is created, Golem switch into cache replay mode. So you can tell you're in cache replay mode because the timeline has now been colored, and you can move into the different frames you've been exported and see how the simulation looks like. You can easily switch between simulation mode and cache replay mode by using that button here. So when you got the white character with the behavior editor icon, you're in simulation mode, which means behaviors get executed. If you click on it, you go into cache replay, which means that now you're seeing what you've been exported. Once you are in cache replay mode, you can still edit the cache. To do so, you can use the simulation cache layout tool. So let's click on it to get it displayed. And the simulation cache layout tool allows to apply deformation to your cache characters. So you can go into Maya vertex mode by pressing F9, and then you can select a bunch of characters into the viewport and apply some Maya regular deformations, such as translate. So I can press W or go into the translate tool. I get the translate gizmo, and now I can translate my cache characters. As you can see, as soon as I have translated my characters, a new line appeared into the simulation cache layout tool with that operation. You can double click on it to edit the properties. Let's say you want to translate those characters by 3 units. And that cache can be disabled or enabled. Sorry about that. So those deformations are stored as deformers applied to the simulation, and thence they do not influence the cache file. You can also rotate characters. So here I can select a bunch of characters, press E to go into Maya rotate mode and rotate my characters. You can press R to go into scale mode and scale the offset between the characters. If you go into the tool settings and specify that your scale is on object, the scale axis is on object, now what you're scaling is the actual scale of your characters. Finally, you can also duplicate characters. So select a bunch of characters and use that button here. Now you have duplicated that group. You can move them into a different place, change their orientation. If you want, you can even change their assets by going into the character palette. The character palette shows you for each character what the asset is wearing. So right now you can see that this character is wearing a sweatshirt and the short pants. So by double clicking on that assets and that assets, you can remove them, and instead you can bring a t-shirt and a long pants if you want to. You can also randomize assets of a bunch of characters at the same time by selecting the group here and press the I feel lucky button. Here we'll just make variation randomly for all your characters. Once you're happy with all those layout operations, just go into the simulation cache layout and make sure to save all your deformations. Let's render our simulation again to see the modification applied to the simulation cache. So that's it for now. Thank you for following this tutorial and see